In the desolate beauty of Siberia's Khamar-Daban Mountains, a journey began that would end in a seemingly inexplicable horror. Like its chilling predecessor, the Dyatlov Pass, the following series of events would leave behind more questions than answers. 7 seasoned hikers prepared for the formidable challenges of the wild set out on what should have been a memorable adventure. But on August 5th of 1993, deep within those ancient peaks, something horrifying would take place. Something would systematically dismantle them from within. This is the Khamar-Daban Incident, a chilling testament to the fragility of life itself, leaving behind a lone survivor to tell a story that to this day, no one can fully explain. Their journey began with a team of 7 experienced hikers out of Petropavl, Kazakhstan, led by the distinguished Lyudmila Korovina. At the age of 41, she was a renowned survivalist and a master of sports and hiking. As for the rest of her team, it was comprised of 6 students, ages 15 to 24. Their planned route was a challenging 80-kilometer traverse through these mountains. All in all, the trip was meant to take roughly 3 days, with the most challenging portion being at the forefront. They were to head out from the small village of Marino starting on August 2nd. It was a rigorous test of endurance, crossing dense taiga forests, boggy marshes, and facing unpredictable shifts in weather that were all too common in what is well believed to be one of the oldest mountain ranges on this planet. By day 3, they were meant to cross paths with another group led by Lyudmila's sisters. From there, they would finish the last leg of the expedition together. Little did they know at the time, none of that would ever take place. Now, by all accounts, the first 2 days of their journey couldn't have gone by any better. The weather had been absolutely perfect, and they had made great time on their ascent of the repeater, which was the first of several peaks along their journey. But on August 4th, as they were making their descent, roughly halfway through the day, the weather turned cold with a chill, and the rain began to fall. Rather than push forward and risk hypothermia, Korovina made the decision to set up camp on a relatively exposed area of that peak. By the next morning, the weather had cleared up. They built a fire, ate breakfast, and kept moving. For 6 of them, however, that would be the last meal they'd ever eat. As they made their way down that peak, there was this radiant aura within the group. Although yes, they had lost about a half a day due to the inclement weather, they had effectively made it past their first challenge. More so, this was the moment that truly marked the entrance into the great wild. Marino now lay several miles behind them, and although there were 2 other groups in the area at that time, if something were to go wrong, at this point, help was effectively non-existent. There was no turning back. They were now deep in the unforgiving heart of the wilderness. Without warning, Alexander Christen, who was at the back of the group, was stricken with a sudden and acute illness. He cried out a loud and guttural scream that echoed across the desolate landscape. He then began bleeding out of his eyes and ears, frothing out of the mouth, then convulsed just before he fell down. This rapid onset shattered the group's composure. Horrified by what they were seeing, the others desperately tried to help. But then the unthinkable happened. Korovina ran over in an effort to render aid. Within just a few seconds, she too began exhibiting those symptoms. After convulsing and falling right on top of Alexander, 24-year-old Tatiana Filipinko rushed over to try and help. But as soon as she did, she began grabbing at her own throat as if she was gasping for air. It was at this point she crawled over to a rocky outcrop and began slamming her head repeatedly onto the rocks. One by one, other members of the group began to succumb to this illness, their faces contorted in expressions of pure agony. It was during this time their movements became erratic, some tearing off their clothes, running off into the distance, while others attempted to hide. Denis Shvatkin fell to the ground and began frothing out of his mouth. Timur Babanov, the youngest of the group, became absolutely catatonic, desperately trying to conceal himself under a large boulder. All the while, Victoria Zalazova attempted to hide under a blanket. The air around them, once invigorating, now felt ultimately oppressive, tainted with something that had systematically dismantled their very minds, stripping away every single ounce of their cognitive ability. They began this trip strong, healthy, and prepared. Yet, they were now sharing this mysterious madness. Now, it's important to note, as all of this was unfolding, there was one member of the group who had yet to experience any of these symptoms. That being then 17-year-old Valentina Udachenko. She had essentially found herself living inside of a literal nightmare, a front row seat to the peril of her comrades. Driven by the instinct to survive, she separated herself from the group, taking off into the distance as their screams faded into the vast expanse. She had moved slightly further down the mountain, and that first night, she set up a makeshift camp. As she sat there trying to figure out what had just happened, she came to a dawning realization. She was no longer equipped for the elements. Everything she needed was back at the scene. Yet, ultimately, she knew if she did not risk going back, she would surely perish within those mountains. That being said, the next day, at sunrise, she took that chance, grabbing a few supplies before heading back down the mountain. For days, she wandered aimlessly, till eventually she found a set of power lines. These in turn led her to a river where on August 10th, 5 days after the incident, she was found by a group of Ukrainian kayakers. She was in shock and reportedly covered in blood. Although her survival was a miracle, it brought back the first whispers of a story that was way too far-fetched to believe, yet too horrifying to ignore. News of Valentina's story eventually reached authorities. However, a formal search wasn't carried out until August 24th. Weeks after the incident. This is due to the fact that Valentina very quickly grew silent after her rescue, and on the off chance they were actually able to have a discussion, she couldn't recall her story. When she finally did, it would take 2 days to locate the rest of the group using a helicopter. Examining their corpses presented a conflicting picture, particularly when contrasted with Valentina's harrowing account. The official autopsy concluded that 5 of them had died of hypothermia, with protein deficiency listed as a contributing factor. Lyudmila Korovina, the group leader, was determined to have died by a heart attack. These official findings, however, stood in stark contrast to the violent and rapid onset of the other symptoms. This discrepancy only deepened the enigma. From the very beginning, the investigation was shrouded in mystery. Authorities struggled to make sense of just what the hell they were looking at. The official conclusion, pointing to heart failure and hypothermia, offered no real answers to the bizarre sequence of events that had been witnessed by Valentina. These conventional explanations failed to account for the extreme contradictory symptoms and the rapid psychological breakdown, a list of which included the screaming, the convulsions, the foaming, along with neurotic behavior and a complete loss of bodily control. They had suffered a chilling and destructive demise that defied all logic. Further adding to the mystery, Valentina Udachenko, in a later interview back in 2018, contradicted her initial report, stating that there was actually no blood and that no one had been screaming. Over the decades that came, countless theories have emerged, each attempting to piece together the fragments of this horror. Yet, no single explanation fully accounts for the entire evidence. As stated, the official cause of death was listed as hypothermia. Proponents argue that in severe cases of hypothermia, there can be hallucination and paradoxical undressing, where a person removes clothing, which might explain some of those aspects. However, this theory fails to account for many of those symptoms, such as the convulsions and the foaming out of the mouth. Another suggestion, infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that can induce panic, nausea, and disorientation. So just what is infrasound? Well, they're sound waves that occur with frequencies that we as humans can't hear, generally considered below 20 Hz. But just because we can't hear them doesn't mean we can't feel them. They're often felt as vibrations or in some cases, pressure changes, especially when experienced at the higher end of those frequencies. Perhaps a unique atmospheric condition caused by the local geography generated these waves. Mountains, especially those with extreme slopes and rugged terrain, are a beacon of infrasound. When powerful blasts of wind blow over that terrain, they don't just howl or whistle. They create huge, slow-moving pressure waves, sort of like if you imagine invisible ocean swells rolling through the air. This is what is referred to as orographic sound, usually extremely low frequencies between 0.01 and 0.1 Hz. These waves can travel for thousands of miles, carrying energy you wouldn't even know was there until you began to feel it. sometimes even making your organs feel like they're vibrating. And this is because they are. But as stated, mountains are beacons of infrasound, meaning wind isn't the only contributing factor when considering this theory. Seismic activity, like tremors and earthquakes, can also generate these waves. In addition to this, avalanches and thunder. That being said, feelings of unease, anxiety, and fear seem to occur in humans more near the frequency of 18.98 Hz, often creating an overwhelming sense of dread. But if we step on up to 19 Hz, as minute of a change as that may seem, this is where we tend to see deep, intense, and primal fear, in turn leading to irrational decision-making, panic, and even extreme psychological distress. So it is quite possible that hikers were exposed to these unseen forces. But again, it doesn't fully explain the physical symptoms, like the foaming out of the mouth or the bleeding. Which leads us into our next theory. While the raw power of Mother Nature does offer an unsettling explanation, we must also consider a more chilling possibility: the involvement of a man-made horror known as Novichok, a terrifying chemical weapon designed specifically to kill. Novichok, which means newcomer in Russian, refers to a group of incredibly dangerous nerve agents. They were secretly developed in the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Think of it as a very deadly chemical designed to wreak absolute havoc on the human nervous system. Our bodies rely on a delicate chemical balance to send signals from our brain to our muscles, organs, and everything in between. Novichok disrupts this balance in a truly horrifying and devastating way. It works by blocking a crucial enzyme in your body. When this enzyme is blocked, nerve signals fire continuously and uncontrollably. It's like having your car's accelerator stuck to the floor when you need to brake, except the brakes don't work. The effects are swift and agonizing, often appearing within seconds to minutes. Uncontrollable spasms, excessive secretions like foaming out of the mouth, and uncontrollable sweating. In addition to this, the muscles you need to make you breathe, like in your diaphragm, often seize up. And at this point, your airways fill with fluid. This leads to suffocation, which is often the direct cause of death when talking about Novichok. And without an immediate, highly specialized medical treatment, Novichok poisoning is almost always fatal. Even if someone survives a small dose, they can suffer permanent debilitating organ damage along with neurological issues. It is theorized that at some point, the Russian military secretly tested Novichok on that mountainside. And when the rain from the night before began evaporating, so did the agent. Symptoms described by Udachenko bear a striking resemblance to death by such chemicals. But critical questions still remain. Why was it not detected? And how did Valentina survive unscathed if it was so potent? How had she become immune? Another substantial and more common theory is that of water contamination. And when covering this aspect, we're really looking at two possibilities. That being biological contamination, such as bacteria and viruses, or chemical, such as natural toxins, or even man-made. During that time period, Lake Baikal was known to be an industrial toxic waste dumping ground. If that waste had found its way into the river and washed downstream, the hikers may have consumed those toxins, some which may not be visible in standard toxicology reports. This would explain the following symptoms: excessive secretion like vomiting and sweating, cramps, disorientation, confusion, seizures, panic, and even hypothermia acceleration. While yes, this explains a sizable portion of the symptoms from Valentina's testimony, many deem this to be a less probable theory due to the fact they say it's been proven Novichok was reportedly tested near the Khamar-Daban region. Now believe me, I know this is a lot, but we're getting down to the last few theories. Mushroom poisoning has also been suggested. Lyudmila Korovina was a forager, and the group might have accidentally consumed some poisonous or hallucinogenic mushrooms. An overdose of certain mushroom toxins can cause psychosis, convulsions, and cardiac arrest. This could explain the mental and physical symptoms, but, again, it raises questions about the rapid and identical onset across multiple individuals, and Valentina's survival without similar symptoms. The most sinister of all these propositions is some sort of military experiment. Given the remote Soviet location, some speculate hikers stumbled upon a clandestine military exercise. Either that, or they became victims of an experimental weapon, such as some sort of supersonic device. However, this theory was largely deemed uncredible due to the fact Khamar-Daban is a public area, making it a highly unlikely place for secret tests. And definitive proof of this remains elusive. Each hypothesis offers a piece of the puzzle, a frightening possibility, but none fully explain the entire evidence, especially when considering the horrific details from Valentina's initial testimony. The lack of a concise answer amplifies this terror. All that being said, one thing is for certain. Those mountains have been there for eons, watching everything that goes through them. Only they have the answer, and they will continue to keep their secrets.